Welcome to Nobilis Erotica, the best science fiction and fantasy erotica anthology podcast in the known universe. This month, a lesbian Rapunzel retelling with a hirsute twist. This is episode 490. I am Nobilis Reed. Lynn Sargent is a writer, aerialist, and holds a PhD in applied philosophy. They are the poetry editor at Utopia Science Fiction magazine. Their work has been nominated for Riesling, Elgin, and Aurora Awards, and has appeared in venues such as Augur Magazine, Strange Horizons, and Daily Science Fiction. Their poetry collection, A Refuge of Tales, is now out from Renaissance Press. To find out more, visit them at scribbledshadows.wordpress.com. Our narrator is Jo Bennett. Jo is a non-binary professional actor, theater educator, and storyteller from Indianapolis, Indiana. When not on stage or behind the mic, they can be summoned into being by assembling freshly brewed black coffee, occult rock vinyl, pretty rocks, and queer erotica. Find them on Twitter at ReadySteadyJo. Links for the author and narrator can be found in the show notes. Remember that you can get even more erotic audio if you join the Patreon campaign at patreon.com/nobilis. In addition, you will get access to the podcast Discord and my undying gratitude. Here we go.
In the Tower Tangled by Lynn Sargent. Rapunzel braids her pubic hair in a long, flowing fishtail. She pulls the strands in and up around her vulva and clitoris, and when she finishes with the strands, she wraps it around her waist like a waspy corset. She brushes her legs and her armpits, her forearms and eyebrows, her fuzz of a mustache, and the small tufts on the top of her toes, coating everything with a heady cedar oil to moisturize and coax it into an organized shape. The hair on her head can bear no coiling. There's simply too much of it. She brushes and plaits it fresh once a week, and otherwise manages through a combination of pillows for her head and neck and a marvelously clever pulley system which keeps the main body of it out of the way while the rest of its cascading length trails all the way down the height of her tower. Sometimes a prince or knight still comes by and tries to climb her hair. At the beginning, she was so excited for their company, until the first one almost fell backwards out of the window as he spluttered over her naked glory. And the second's face shriveled in disgust the further his eyes trailed down from her scalp to her cunt, her hair clearly becoming more offensive the further down he went. After a few experiences like this, she huffed and pouted about it. For a while, she took to screaming at them the way she's sure her mother would have, telling them that they were disgusting to see her as nothing but her body, asking them if they felt it appropriate to let their shock overcome their respect for her humanity. But none of them ever felt or exhibited any shame. At best, they scurried back down her braid. At worst, they told her she was a monster and should feel lucky that they didn't slay her on the spot, though none ever moved to actually do so. After that, she tried keeping her hair up so there would be no more visitors. There were piles of her head hair all around. She would trip over it as she went to paint, accidentally slop the cooking on it, lose her favorite books in the mess of it all. For a week, she tried to cut it all off at the beginning of every day, but it always grew back by nightfall, and the growing of it left her exhausted in body and mind. All these strategies grew to be their own sort of tiresome, and ultimately she decided that it was just easier to allow the scalp massage to happen as they climb. After so long now, she's confident that once they'll see her, they'll be just like all the others and leave. She doesn't even bother to greet them. This mindset makes it easier. She no longer expects their company or even their politeness. Still, it wears. There have been so many others. She finds it baffling, really. Surely the true extent of her curse must have reached them by now, since so many have fled. Do none of them speak of her? And yet, if they don't speak of her, why do still more come? Even more than that, she's baffled by their clear lack of common sense. If she's got all this glorious hair on her head, what do they expect from the rest of her? Honestly. The one today, though, intrigues her. He is not like the others. She's learned to tell by feel the quality of different ways of climbing. Some have jarring, hand-over-hand climbs, bouncing and heaving the whole way up. Some are a little more strategic and use a weaving step climb, with greater or lesser technique, resulting in greater or lesser levels of split ends. Not that it really matters, since it will repair itself. But this climber, he weaves his way around the fabric of her hair, deliciously pulling evenly between feet and hands, never too much pressure in one spot, never too sudden a transition. It's honestly sublime, even though she almost turns to look. But she's sure it will turn out like the others. Looking will only ruin this delightful scalp massage. Rapunzel is starting to drift off into that beautiful Zen state where she is just floating from sensation to sensation, when a sultry voice above her lets out a, "Wow." She looks up, puzzled to see a curvaceous and muscled silhouette, shadowed by the bright afternoon sun. She blinks, partially from the sun and partially from confusion. I mean, I know De Vries said I'd be interested in this quest, but he didn't warn me about this, the climber says, still in awe. Rapunzel, though, is in no place to read the subtlety in her tone. Yes, I'm aware there must not be too much talk of specifics since you all keep coming, she snaps, annoyed. The climb wasn't even that hard, the climber gushes. How are you still here? She exclaims, gesturing with her hands at Rapunzel and her body. Rapunzel has flipped from her place where her head was resting against the ledge of the windowsill and has clambered to the standing position so that she can glare at the climber, hands placed sturdily on her hips. Well, either they've been so repulsed by me, or I've been so repulsed by them, we've been unable to consummate and break the curse. Something about true love and all that jazz. She rolls her eyes, reminding herself how perfectly content she is with love as the truest love of all. Wild, the climber says, shaking her head. She gapes at Rapunzel for a moment longer before catching herself. Well, can I stay and chat? I'd love a chance at, honestly, even consummation, if not love. You are gorgeous, but I don't mean to gawk. Maybe you'd like to throw on a robe first? I'm Melly, by the way. She holds out her hand to be shook. Rapunzel does not shake it, but merely holds her gaze, seeing the guilelessness there, and almost the surprising amount of restraint Melly seems to be showing when her gaze would clearly prefer to be wandering all over Rapunzel's body. Rapunzel shrugs. I get too warm if I wear anything with all the hair. It'd be like putting a cat in a sweater. It sure would, echoes Melly, still in awe. Rapunzel purses her lips, half annoyed, half intrigued and flattered. Why don't you sit and have tea with me? She gestures to a little table near the fire and puts on some water to boil. As Melly moves away from the window, the light which she previously blocked begins to illuminate her. She has short hair and strong hands, wears high-waisted breeches and a thin-strapped top tucked into them, showing off her ample biceps and rippled forearms. Once Rapunzel settles into her chair and places the brewing pot of tea between them, Melly launches into conversation. So, they speak of the maiden in the tower, but never why she's there. It's something Rapunzel ought to have heard 100 times if any of the others had been able to hide their disgust at looking for her for the 30 seconds or so it would have taken them to struggle the sentence out. But they haven't. And yet, The explanation has been rehearsed in her mind for the last half a decade. She's been here without her mother, that they've been coming. So, she explains. Ma was a witch who knew the ways of the world. When I was born like this, people thought I was either devil's spawn or blessed, with no in between. So she brought me here and imbued the tower over the years with all the might of her magic that I might be safe and cared for. She knew she was dying by the time I was 14 and was so afraid that some prince or lordling who was interested in the aesthetics or rarity of curses might come and snatch me up for what I was rather than who I am, or else for entrepreneurial greed. If you cut it off, it grows back really quite shockingly fast, you see. Exhausting, but also inexhaustible. Rapunzel holds up a braid sadly. So, she made a spell that meant I could only leave if there was true, consummated love. Otherwise, I have everything I need, and the tower is outfitted to allow me to do what I can even with. She moves her hands over and around her body in a gesture to all the hair there. Melly is entranced by the story. Do you even want to leave, then? Rapunzel pauses for a moment, never really considering the possibility that she might not someday leave the tower. It's rather lonely here with Ma gone, is the sentiment she finally settles on. It might also be nice to see some of the wider world, but I worry about how people might look at me, or how I'll handle all the braids without giving myself a migraine and back pain. Melly is pensive, eyes darting around the tower, taking in the clever system of pulleys that accommodate Rapunzel's needs. That is an interesting problem. I'd like to think about it some more. In the meantime, could I keep visiting you? Rapunzel feels a softening at the question, like the first warm breeze of spring caressing the ice, a gentle reminder that soon it will be time to change shape and flow once more. Yes, I do think I'd like that. She smiles. Melly comes once or twice a week without fail for the next 2 months. Rapunzel tells her about her mother and the recipes she used to teach her, how her talent for magic is small, but she still uses it when she makes the occasional hair wreath, and the small charms imbued within them add to the cheer of her space. Melly brings her pressed flowers from adventures for her to weave into them, and tells her of her exploits, many solo, but some alongside her dear friend Davrid, the gnomes she has rescued from the deep wells, the princes whose quests she's aided, the dragons she's helped to resettle. Princes still come throughout this time. Melly asks Rapunzel if she'd like her to spread the word about the maiden in the tower's true predicament, but Rapunzel says no. Melly ultimately agrees it's for the best, since, like some of the princes said, they'd likely just label her a beast and come to slay her instead. Both women sit grimly with that fact. Better the men's bewilderment and embarrassment shape the silence of the narrative. You know, though, I'd help you move if you ever needed that. I'd find the best builders, reach out to the most devious witches, and we'd make you a new tower, with clever storage for your hair, so you wouldn't have to dangle it out the window if you didn't want to. Together, they laugh at all the possibilities, lounging in Rapunzel's reading nook on the nest of pillows there that allow her to rest in all kinds of different positions and relieve the inevitable pressure on her spine. Rapunzel paints imaginary floor layouts with her hands, and Melly joins her, pointing and asking questions. Here? She asks, and Rapunzel takes her hand, moving it slightly to the right. No, here, she responds, feeling her voice catch as the warmth of their hands together tingles up her forearm. Melly's hands are rough, muscled, and dexterous. She's admired them often, but touching them brings up even more dangerous thoughts about what it would be like to have them touching her as she touches herself. She turns to Melly, still holding her hand, and the desire in the other woman's eyes are clear. Melly often looks at her with desire, but this time it's so intense that she freezes in shock, unable to take the action she wants to. But she doesn't have to. Melly crushes her hand within her own, and reaching around her with the other arm, she flips to be on top of Rapunzel and buries her in a kiss. Rapunzel is 12 different kinds of self-conscious. Is it okay that she's naked and Melly is clothed? They've always spent time together like this, but never against one another. Will she shed on her like a cat? Is that okay? Does her light mustache tickle the underside of Melly's nose unpleasantly? Is she too passive because the weight of her head braid encourages her to sink further into the pillows, to drown in the deliciousness of Melly's lips instead of pushing up to show the fervency of her desire? Eventually, they part, both gasping for air after the excitement and activity of their passion. "Was that okay?" Melly asks, biting her lip. It makes Rapunzel want to kiss her again. She nods, then reaches up to grab a fistful of Melly's shirt and pull her back down, giving way to her wants. They have talked in passing about the things that may or may not follow after kissing. Rapunzel knows that Melly has lain with men and women and those who are both or neither, dryads and imps, great sorceresses, and men who have gone on to be kings. She might have dismissed such stories if they came from a boastful knight or a haughty prince, but she believes all Melly's tales. The woman is a wonder. She understands why they all might have wanted to lay with her, and how she could be exactly the kind of person to end up with the opportunity to meet them and do so. She found Rapunzel, after all. Melly, of course, knows Rapunzel has had none of these experiences, and yet, in their talks, she has made it apparent that she wants to, that it is not for lack of desire that she has not yet experienced the pleasure of another's will to pleasure her acting upon her body. Now, Melly seems to take fulfilling all that want, all that unsurety of want, as a personal challenge. She sets to work on Rapunzel's body with her hands, her body, her mouth. Rapunzel rides as Melly's hands stroke and pull, push and roll, massaging her, teasing her, making her lose all sense of the world beyond her body, and making the world within simultaneously more comforting and more expansive than she has ever experienced before. Melly's mouth leaves hers and trails down her neck to her breasts, sucking and biting as she goes. Then she moves down to Rapunzel's clitoris, placing generous kisses on the downy fuzz of her belly as she goes. Then she wends her way over Rapunzel's thigh, inhaling the musk of her vulva, kissing and nipping at the tender crease where her thigh meets her pelvis until her tongue begins flicking and sucking, twirling and tantalizing at the only spot that seems to matter. Until a gentle, neatly trimmed, if rough-skinned finger parts her labia and sets to work inside, moving in time with her mouth. Rapunzel sees stars, sees the birth of the universe, feels an earthquake move through her, and she screams as she's never screamed before. Not even as she screamed at the men, not even as she screamed so many times in frustration at the nonsensical nature of the world outside her tower and her contradictory desire to, at times, be part of it. It is more sublime than she could have ever imagined. And yet, as her screaming, the earthquake and the stars subside, all these other frustrations come roaring back. She feels all too aware of the sweat mixed into her hair, the slick unorganized nature of it, the smell of her euphoria mixed with the cedar oil. It feels too much. She's too wet, too loose, too airy, too smelly, too vulnerable. She bursts into sobs, rolling away from Melly into the pillows. Her head braid is slightly trapped underneath some of the pillows that shifted during the course of her writhing, and her cheeks bloom with shame at the thought of exactly how wild she was. The weight of her hair and the slight pull of it make her sob even harder as she thinks of what a burden it is sometimes, as she remembers how Melly felt climbing it for the first time. Melly will never want to climb it, never want to see her again now. She is sure. Melly follows her, crawling back up so she can nuzzle her head into the crook of Rapunzel's neck and trapezius. She wraps her top arm around Rapunzel, squeezing her tight. Rapunzel just sobs all the harder, slowly curling in on herself, around Melly's arm, like her shame is a slice of bread, to be crushed into a ball and therefore more easily swallowed. The crying itself is a new shame, the embarrassment of her reaction to the pleasure, to their communion, its own self-sustaining loop. "It's okay," Melly croons. "My first time was intense, too. Is there anything I can do? Is there anything you didn't like?" Her tenderness is like a knife, cutting into Rapunzel over and over. Oh, it would be so much easier if she were like all the rest of them. If she would say something to justify Rapunzel screaming at her to get out until she could collect up all the pieces of herself and figure out what she is feeling, why she is crying, why Melly is still here. Eventually, she manages to choke out, "I'm sorry. You didn't do anything wrong. It's just me. I just need to be alone right now." Melly nods sadly, concern apparent in her eyes. She opens her mouth to ask a question, then quickly swallows it, even as her concern deepens. "I'll let you down," Rapunzel says quickly, adjusting the pulleys to let her braid fall all the way to the ground below. Before Melly leaves, she caresses Rapunzel's cheek and whispers, "Rapunzel, thank you. Today was a wonder, and I hope you'll let me see you again. I'd love to see where this goes." Rapunzel turns her cheek, and Melly resists the urge to kiss it before she grips the braid and slides lightly, elegantly, all the way to the ground below. Melly comes back the next day, and the next, and the one after that, but Rapunzel has pulled her hair all the way up. Melly can imagine it piled around the tower, and her worry deepens. Rapunzel mopes around the tower, not even keeping up with the care of all her hair. She is distraught. Sometimes she thinks about leaving and running away forever, now that she can. Now that she has had true, consummated love, leaving would be easy. She'd redo the pulley system the opposite way and anchor the end of her braid and chop it all off at the bottom. She'd need a few days of recovery after regrowing it all, but really it would be all too simple. The problem is that after that she could never return. She doesn't know how to climb, and even if she tied off the end, who is to say what would happen to the braid without care? The birds love wayward strands. How long before they carry them all off to line nests for their baby chicks? But if she wasn't here, she wouldn't have to bear the knowledge that Melly is here too, day after day, and Rapunzel is too much a monster to even speak to her, to explain. Ultimately, even she doesn't quite understand what happened, though each day of distance makes it a little easier to try to puzzle it out, makes the shame of her reactions, her rejection, a little easier to manage. Although each day she doesn't let Melly up, doesn't let her hair down, weighs on her a little more, seems to make the inevitability of their reconnection less inevitable, makes greater the distance of the chasm of silence she must jump across to reignite their friendship, love, possibility. She isn't sure, but she knows she still wants to find out. It's been a week, and Rapunzel stands by the window, waiting for Melly to reappear, willing herself to work up the courage and let down her hair once more. She sees Melly riding across the plain, and her heart stops. How is she still here? How is she still coming? Will Rapunzel be able to save herself from a collapse of will this time? She imagines that she is not the princess in the tower, but the dragon, there to be slain. She remembers Melly telling her about a dragon relocation she participated in once, alongside De Vriend and a druid, Linden. It was a youngling in a cave that had been stumbled upon by a group of apprentices who wanted to be knights. They'd tormented it for weeks, practicing at being knights by poking at it with sticks, until one knight must have poked too hard, and of course it fought back. It was terrified. One of them lost their leg to a bad burn. The villagers were also terrified after that, and when we got there, didn't know that we weren't with them, that we weren't there to hurt it. The only humans it had ever seen had hurt it. Linden subdued it, and had rehabilitated it over the length of our journey, tended to it when it was seasick as we brought it to the Dragon Isles. At times, it still belched fire, even when he was being tender with it. It'd act shamed after, bowing its head and even tucking its tail between its legs. But it was an uncontrollable reaction at times. He'd say that even for animals, trauma just lives in the body sometimes, and there's only so much conditioning can do to get it out. We mostly just followed his lead. We were there as the muscle, and he did all the real work. But the thing did let me pet it once. It was delightfully warm, and its scales were smooth as river stones. I'll never forget it. Rapunzel has been worrying over this story like it is her own polished riverstone. So often there is a dragon in a tower for a knight to slay to get the maiden. How would it feel after a dozen nights? How does she feel after all the dozens of rejections, the scowls of disgust, the stammers and shock, as though she has attacked her interlopers with her mere existence? She thought perhaps it was okay, that she had healed, but perhaps she hasn't. Not fully. But perhaps Melly will still understand, will help her work through it, even if, at times, she belches flames, if she can apologize, if she can explain. She lets her hair down. God, she has missed the gentle tug, the mild twist, the clear adoration in Melly's climb. Even with the pulley system, standing for the climb sets her to swaying. But she wants to be up, looking at Melly, ready for Melly when she makes it to the top. Melly is smiling, and her eyes are full, a mirror to Rapunzel's own visage. The women embrace. For anyone else, it might be too tight, but Rapunzel knows that Melly enjoys the feeling of being a little crushed now and then. Her apology comes tumbling out. The whole time Melly is shaking her head and squeezing Rapunzel's hand. Of course, I understand. Of course it's okay if it happens again. I love you, Rapunzel. I want you to feel good. And it's okay if that's overwhelming. We can do whatever you want. Please, just don't shut down on me again. Rapunzel is weeping. I'll try, I promise. Nights no longer come by the tower. Word has spread of the piercing screams that every so often emanate from the window where the maiden used to let down her hair. These aren't the screams of monsters or the victims, Or perhaps they are, and the stories have simply given us the wrong kind of idea about what those things can mean. They are the screams of two women engaged in passionate lovemaking. Melly has wrapped Rapunzel's headplate around her wrists and ankles, tying her to the bed. She's unraveled the braid of pubic hair from around her waist and is using the end of it to tickle and tease up and down her legs and around the clitoris. Rapunzel's eyes are squeezed tight with unreleased lust. After a few moments, she can't take it anymore. "Lettuce! Oh, lettuce!" she screams, and Melly immediately stops and unties her. The moment she is free, Rapunzel pounces on the other woman. "Oh, I couldn't stand it anymore. I needed you." She pins Melly beneath her, kissing her and grinding herself on Melly's thigh, shuddering with a mini orgasm as she does so, before plunging her mouth into the other woman's cunt until her face is wet with Melly's pleasure. They roll over together, exhausted. Melly smiles. "See, I told you we'd figure out ways to have adventures." They kiss, and Rapunzel makes soft vocalizations of approval. "I wonder when your carpenter will be ready for a test run of the carrier," she says idly, in that petty post-coital space where nothing really matters yet, but you are starting to get used to being in the world again. "I'll ask him the next time I'm on bandit patrol." They've been working on plans to allow Rapunzel to travel with Melly, if and when she wants to. Already, Melly has set up a new rope in the pulley system so she can lift Rapunzel up to the tower and follow behind her. And they've gone for short walks in the meadow until Rapunzel's hair has been too heavy to manage. But there's no real rush or desire. Melly makes Rapunzel feel comfortable in her skin, exactly as she is, quirks and all. When they rise from the bed, Melly helps her groom her hair back into place, massaging the cedar oil in with warm, strong hands. She's not quite as good as Rapunzel is at braiding yet, but that will come with time. She wants to learn, and that's what matters.
And that's our story. If you'd like to get an ad-free version of this podcast, head to patreon.com/nobilis. As a supporter, you will have access to a personal RSS feed that you can drop into your podcatcher. And if you want bonus content every month, bump up your support to $3 a month. Remember to pick up Monster Whisperer 2nd Class in your favorite ebook retailer or on the Riverdale Avenue Books website. Or pick up the audiobook on Audible, Amazon, or Apple. Your support will help ensure this series continues. You have been listening to the Nobilis Erotica podcast. Theme music is composed and performed by Mass Relay. This podcast is released under a Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, No Derivatives license. Until next time, listen hard.